Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to give everyone another couple minutes to log in. You are in the supply chain primer. Hopefully you're in the right Zoom land. So we'll get started in just a minute. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks, y'all, for joining us. You are in the supply chain primer of the Regenerate Conference, brought to you by the Southwest Grassfed Livestock Alliance. This is part 2 of 2 parts, and I appreciate everybody who's taking so much time out of their 2 weeks to be here, and hopefully y'all have had good experiences also with the rest of the conference. And we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Okay. Give me just 1 second. All right. Okay. All right, here we go. So I want to take a minute here to arrive and get present. I think it's really challenging not to be in a million other places during our Zoom life. And so I want to ask everybody to close your other windows on your computer, go ahead and get water or coffee or whatever you need right now, and center yourself and get here. And in order to do that, we are also going to take a bit of a few breaths, do a little bit of breath work. So we're going to take 3 breaths. You can close your eyes if you feel motivated to. Inhale and exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale and exhale. Okay, hopefully that helps everybody get focused. Go ahead and make sure your name is showing the way you want it to be and add your pronouns. And I just wanted to go through a couple of quick Zoom housekeeping things. I think we're all up to date with who we are and where we are. But remember that our comments in our chat should remain courteous and as you would in person. And we're going to use the chat box for various different comments. We're going to use the Q&A for speaking live. I'm sorry, raise your hand for speaking live. And we're going to use some breakout groups so that you can have some chances to engage with the other folks that are here today. So one of the things that I've experienced lately is in terms of these virtual gatherings is a desire to not get rid of that connection. And so we built a sort of longer breakout group at the end of this presentation so that y'all can actually you know, get to know each other and hopefully have a chance to meet some folks. And we've got some of our presenters maybe are not yet on mute. So can all presenters mute their, mute themselves? Thank you. And so I encourage you all to get courageous, get ready to talk, get ready to participate. And our focus today is all about processing and processor relationships. We're going to go into labeling and inventory management and some sales strategy and some pricing strategy in a brief way. But the focus of the bulk of today is really about what to do with your processor to encourage a wonderful and loving relationship. So it's like processor therapy today. And in order to help us out with that, we've got Holly Zink, who is from Durango, Colorado, from Sunnyside Meats. And I'm going to introduce her. She's going to introduce herself in just a minute. But we're going to start by actually engaging y'all. And I'm going to ask you to come forward if you were one of the spokespeople of our group session from part 1. And I'd like you to share what those most pressing questions and issues were that you detailed in that group. So you're going to kind of share for your whole group a quick annotated version of what y'all talked about in those sessions. If you happen to be here newly, or if you don't see your spokesperson chiming in and you would like to do that, go ahead and raise your hand so that we can call on you and share. We're going to spend no more really than 10 or 15 minutes. I'd love to use the whole time to hear from you, to hear about what your issues are. This is not like a place to gripe, so I'm going to take 1 or 2 minutes, but it's a place to, you know, voice concerns that maybe we can address today here, both in our presentation and also talking with Holly. So we're going to take notes so that we remember what you all want to talk about and address later on. And with that, I encourage you to get brave, get vocal, think about what doesn't go right and what you want to work through today in this group, and raise your hand so we can let you speak. All right, so Mary, go ahead and let us know what you're thinking.
Good morning. So I was in a group with Julia and Doug. Julia's out of California also, so am I, and Doug is out of New Mexico. And we talked about forming a cooperative with other producers to get the processing done. And then the other thing we talked about is that we're all kind of in the same boat, and that we need to be more politically active. Because so many laws are geared towards industrial ag, and we want to get that changed.
Cool. Awesome. You guys went straight for the solutions. I love it. Okay, let's see, Kathy. Thank you, Mary, for that.
Yeah. I was in a group with Trudy from Canada and Joel from Lopez Island, and Joel and I probably had the same issues, which was COVID really added an even narrower bottleneck to the access to processing, both in the slaughter and the cut and wrap. And Trudy's son handles all their processing and established a really good relationship with their local processor. They're lucky that they have one pretty close by. And just a note, I'm a part of the Bay Area Ranchers Co-op that's forming, that actually officially formed, but is working on fundraising right now.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
All right, let's see some more hands. What are some? I know there's a lot of you in this presentation, and I know not everybody is happy with what's happening with their processor. So if you're feeling a little shy, go ahead and put it in the chat as well, but just so we can be sure to address what your needs are. And I'd love to hear from a couple more people. You know, problems with communication, problems with availability. I mean, we all know that you all have problems of availability, so maybe that's one we don't really need to go too deeply into, but one that we could troubleshoot in terms of how to schedule better with your processor. What else is going on in your processing world that you want us to talk about today? This session is really, you know, for you. I know it's early in the morning. But it's not that early for most of you. Anyone else? No one else? Okay, well, I'm going to look to y'all to maybe drop in any of your thoughts as we go along into the chat as well. Please don't be hesitant to do that. And that way, you know, Holly and I can address what your actual needs are. Okay, so we're going to keep going from here then. And with that, I'm going to just introduce Holly. And Holly has been generous enough to give us 2 or more hours of her time here today, and some good time working on our presentation together. And so, Holly, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself, tell us just a little bit about your history and what you do and what Sunnyside does, and then we'll come back to you a little bit later.
Okay. So I'm Holly Zink. I'm the general manager of Sunnyside Meats Livestock Processing Facility. I also own Sunnyside Farms Market, which is a retail craft butcher shop in Durango, Colorado. We are a USDA inspected processing facility on a small scale. We are not a large processing facility. We do operate year round. We don't process any wild game. We're distinctly devoted to serving our agricultural community. We process beef, hogs, lambs, goats, and occasionally bison and yak. We opened in 2002, built the facility from ground up, and the store, you know, built that from ground up as well. And so we do private labeling for USDA customers who want to have their logo and their special claims on their labels. We do organically certified processing, and we also do custom processing for people who aren't going to retail the packaged meat. They may sell livestock on the hoof, but they're not in the business of retailing packaged meat.
Great. Thanks, Holly. I'm really excited to have Holly here today. She has an amazing reputation in the community as an excellent person to work with, and one of the sort of beloved processors, which is not something you hear very often. So I'm glad to have you here today, Holly.
Thank you.
Just a couple of other things before we dive in that I wanted to note. Y'all received with your announcement this morning handouts. Those are the same handouts from last week. I didn't want there to be any confusion about that, just in case. And there's one addition, which is the presentation slides. They're also able to be found in the virtual conference center, which I don't have the website of off the top of my head, but I think you all have it in a million emails from Quivira and Regenerate. So you can find the Zoom recording, the PDF presentation, and all of the handouts there as well after the fact, or in your email from this morning. So just a little reminder there. So let's dive into the meat of things. What are we here talking about? The way that I like to think about it is actually an investment in your relationship with your processor. You're dealing in an industry that is struggling, and we could always say that in so many ways about farming and ranching as well. But I think we all know also that meat cutting is something that has lost a lot of ground in the last 100 years because of consolidation and verticalization, and because it's it's hard. And so not that what you do is not hard, but just to remember that your processor is 100% fundamental for your survival. And so what that creates is an interdependence. And that's, you know, much like any other relationship. And that interdependence can create, you know, a difficult situation or a really positive situation. And this relationship directly impacts the service you receive. So the service that your processor is giving you is not just some, you know, standard out there in the world. It needs to be taken care of by both sides. This is also the one place in your supply chain that you give up complete control, right? And that's really hard. And nobody's claiming that you shouldn't have strong emotions about giving up that control. But it often results in adversarial behavior, and there's not a lot of room for that. And so I think if we go into the relationship knowing that there should and can be a mutual dependence, a mutual commitment, and mutual respect, then we're in a better place to get what we need and want out of it. I see most frustrations coming out of a lack of understanding or miscommunication on one or both sides. Now, you can't control how your processor is going to behave, but you can certainly control how you behave, and that's really what I'm getting at here. So that sounds a lot like you know, couples therapy, and it is, because I think it's really rooted in empathy. And what I'm trying to stress is that each side gets to know what the other one is really truly dealing with. There's a great handout that we included in your packet that is from the Niche Meat Processors Assistant Network that just describes small plant economics. Now, they didn't make that handout for producers to get empathetic with, but they made it for folks that are thinking about going into small plant operation. That said, it's a great breakdown of what happens inside of a small plant. So what I'm getting at is that this is a tool for you to use to understand what their needs are, what their limitations are. What is their daily schedule? What is their throughput? What are their numbers? What does it take to meet them? What are their financial realities? What's their staff reality? You know, what's going on in the day-to-day of your processor? And how do you find out? You ask questions. And the kind of questions that you're asking in an ideal world are employing something that's called appreciative inquiry. And I know this sounds really potentially out there for a lot of you, but these are kind of the rules of basic kindness that maybe we forget in a transactional service-oriented situation with a vendor that we need to employ in order to get what we want. So appreciative inquiry is listening well and asking clarifying questions at every step of the way. So that just doesn't mean spitting out what you need and want. It means hearing what the other person can do for you. And we expect that to come in return, of course. So the way you can do that is by setting that example and, you know, asking what every step is going to mean for the other person instead of just focusing on your needs. So in terms of how to actually manage the logistics of the relationship, and this is something that I think we'll get into deeper with Holly as well, a little bit of due diligence notes on how to do due diligence with your processor. So you and your processor actually share in record keeping best practices. It's not just on them and it's not just on you. And I think obviously in our first session, you can tell from the focus on the yield and margin calculator that it's something that we really stress, that I really stress in working with ranchers, that they're really in charge of their own information instead of just waiting for a report from the bookkeeper or the processor or the accountant. So this means that, again, we're in a joint partnership here. So remember to provide clear cutting instructions, maybe more detail than you actually think, and asking for their advice. And of course, asking for a copy of what you submit and what they see. So then so that happens beforehand. And then we get to the pickup. And And I think that there is a lot of variation in who's actually doing the weighing, and who is actually doing that kind of due diligence on the back end. I really suggest that everybody reweighs what they get from their processor, not because they mistrust what is happening on the processing floor, but just because, again, it's an area where you can be in control of your own data and your own information. Now, that can happen on site if there's space. Again, that comes from a conversation. Or it could happen when you take everything back to the ranch. And you're basically checking off against your cut sheet and your order to make sure that everything is there. Remember that a production report is not required. There's no like required thing that they give you. And we're going to get to some of the questions to ask ahead of time. We touched on those in our last session, and there's a very extensive 2-page piece of your PDF handout that is all the questions to ask your processor before you get going in the relationship, and really before your first harvest. So one of the most important ones is, what are they going to give you at pickup? What's their production report look like? Understand their norms so you can gauge and negotiate what it is that you need, what kind of detail that you need. And again, you know, part of that is keeping track of your own data, and that can happen in some of the tools that we've already presented. So I don't know, Holly, if you want to add anything in here to this little due diligence piece right now, anything that comes to mind. Hold on, Holly, you're still on mute.
Thank
I
you.
know, it's hard to remember.
Getting used to all of these new ways of communicating in this time that we're in. So I was just making some notes as you were speaking about, you know, when you had asked me to talk later about best practices, hardships, and successes that we've had over the years with Sunnyside Meats. I was taking some notes about some things that you were talking about. So do you want me to just go ahead and address those, a couple of those things now, or do you want me to?
If they feel pertinent to what we're talking about right now, focused on this kind of record keeping and due diligence, yeah, let's dive right in.
Sure. So one of the things that we have done at Sunnyside Meats is we have installed, and we use a couple of technology pieces that don't necessarily exist at all small packing houses. So we have a building wide tracking system. So when the livestock arrives and has been stunned, before we exsanguinate, we take a live weight. So the animal is done, but we capture the live weight, and then we capture the hot carcass weight, and then we capture the weight as it comes out of the holding cooler, so that the producer can understand what kind of shrink they experience during the time that the carcass is aging. And then we have a yield report that we give them that outlines every cut, how much it weighs, and what they have in packaged product, so that they can understand what, you know, their pricing and some other things related to genetics, or are the cuts that they're choosing giving them the best yield? Is there something else that they could do to increase that yield? So we offer quite a bit of communication. You mentioned weighing, that the rancher should weigh the producer should weigh the packaged meat as well. And we would have, I'm sure, no problem with that. I encourage people to do that for their record keeping. When you mentioned weighing it back at the ranch, if it's not something they can do at the packing facility, that can tend to get a little bit sticky. So if there is something missing, or we didn't get a box, you know, like we have outside of all of the boxes are labeled with the barcode that relates to that animal's unique carcass ID number. And also it has the customer's name and address and their information on the label on the outside of the box and on each package. But, you know, sometimes human error occurs. We might miss a box. We might put the packages in the wrong box. So it's good to double check that. But if it happens after they get home, there's a little bit of difficulty as far as if they got something that isn't theirs, which fortunately doesn't happen often, but it does sometimes.
Sure.
After it's left the premises, and if it's a USDA inspected thing, then that can cause a little bit of trouble as far as bringing it back and us having to guarantee temperature when it's offsite, those kinds of things.
That's
so maybe
a great point.
I would suggest that if the conversation could happen before the pickup and the pickup date is scheduled and the processor knows when they're coming and can make time to go through the production report or yield report or whatever you want to call it, go through that with the customer as they're loading,
Yeah.
then you take out the issues that happen once the product leaves the premises.
Right, because there is that risk of the handling that happens afterwards, and it's technically in somebody else's hands. And so if the processor needs to take it back, and God forbid something goes wrong later, could be an issue. That
Right.
said, I think a lot of processors won't take the time to go through a production report with a rancher in the moment of pickup, don't have the time, or don't have the space to have them kind of sorting through their stuff. So again, this is one of many, I think, delicate points where you can avoid conflict and get what you need as a rancher by approaching this conversation before the moment. So not in the moment of picking up your first load of animals or your 50th load of animals, but beforehand with a different conversation. Like, hey, well, so, I haven't really been checking off my orders and we've had some things slip through the cracks. Do you mind if we go through it when I pick up next time? Something like that. But it's a great point about there's a hole there in traceability if it leaves the site. But it happens, and it happens obviously when animals are leaving the processor LTL and going to a different location further away. Those problems tend to be harder to troubleshoot. And again, it gets back to having that invested relationship to work through it together, both sides together in the event if something really goes wrong. So just as a reminder, drop your questions anywhere and in the chat, and we're gonna come back to them in our dedicated Q&A moment.
And I think another point here, and I'm not sure what the scope of understanding of the group that I'm speaking with is about yields. I speak with groups that are dipping their toe in the pool of thinking about getting into ranching, and also groups that are very experienced in growing livestock and knowing what to expect as finished product, but maybe asking questions or doing research on your own about what should I expect. If I bring in 1,000-pound steer, what should I expect to get in packaged weight? That way, I think some people who are doing it first time or maybe haven't paid attention to the difference between on the hoof and in the package historically, when they look at those numbers, it can be a little bit shocking, like, wait, where did it all go? Right. And so just understanding the relationship between what you would expect from live to hot carcass weight, what you would expect to lose in the aging process as evaporation and shrink, and then what you would expect based on the types of cuts that you choose from, the aged carcass, hanging carcass weight to the packaged product weight.
Yeah.
So have that information kind of in your mind ahead of time, and that way there isn't the suspicion like, did you give my meat to someone else, which is that's one of the big sticking points, I think, between producers and processors when they don't understand what they will be receiving, that it can be like, wait, this doesn't seem right. So have that conversation ahead of time, or do your homework ahead of time, and just know what you're expecting based on the genetics of the livestock that you're raising and the cuts that you choose.
Great. Yeah. And I think that approach is three-pronged. One is doing that research, like we talked about in session 1, keeping your own records so that you know what your animals do across time. Number 2, and talking to your processor about what they see that comes through their plant. And that's your kind of 3 points of rancher due diligence to getting to those understandings. Because I can guarantee if you go to a processor with the comment, you know, where did it all go? You're not coming into the relationship empathetically. It's kind of accusatory. It's not going to get you a response that you want, no matter what happened. So I think there's something to be said for exactly the mode of communication as well. All right, I'm going to move forward, and then Holly, unless there's anything else you think is super pertinent to this slide right now.
No.
Okay. All right, we'll keep going, and then we'll come back. So building the relationship. It kind of gets down to simple rules like making a good impression. First impression, but also second and third impression. And the root of that is really treating each other as equals, right? This is not a servant relationship. This is not just a vendor. This is somebody that you're really getting in bed with. They have, lest you forget, in their hands your 2 years of work. They are 100% in charge of securing that quality. Do not forget that you need them to do that with and for you. And so this is not somebody with which you just have a transaction. This is somebody with which you're like exiting the journey of your animal, right? To the point where you can actually execute your business. It's that big of a deal. So let's treat it as a big deal. Let's treat this relationship as a big deal. Get to know one another. Get on a first name basis. Get a first visit on the books with key staff members. Figure out who's the key staff person that you need to be talking to, even if that's not the first person you talk to on the phone. And try to be there in person, again, according to when that works for your processor, so that they can be dedicated to that meeting, not just in the middle of a busy production day. And this all happens before your first harvest. So we are advocating for clear and respectful and timely communication. Again, giving plenty of forewarning for your needs. And then in terms of the actual kind of like machine of bringing your animals in, scheduling dates, being reliable. Be reliable for them. Count on yourself as much as you want, to count on them. And that includes when you're making dates, when you are giving them the number of animals, when you're communicating changes, when you're communicating problems, when you're giving payment. And don't forget to give compliments, right? We can very easily forget that there's always moments, and especially now when our human contact is so limited. Let's take care of each other in these conversations. So we all know yeah, go ahead, Holly.
Yeah, I would like to, I'm sorry, you guys, I had a spider crawling on me a minute ago, so I had a little freak out in the background. That's what that was all about.
I didn't notice.
I think we resolved that issue. Yeah, so from the processor's perspective on this one, there are certain times of the year that we are very booked up, and for us those times are between August and December. So our clients typically book their appointments for those months a year in advance, which I know is a lot to ask because you don't know a year in advance what's going to be happening on a given day. So we appreciate their taking that step and doing that. And then we, the way that we reciprocate is we have an online based scheduling program. So it will send email reminders, text reminders, and also we do phone calls, but to remind, life gets busy. Maybe you forgot you're supposed to bring your livestock in next week. So we call a week in advance and say, are we still on for Friday? And we do understand if somebody isn't up to weight or got hurt or, dad's in the hospital, don't have anybody to drive the trailer, we can be understanding about those things, but it is difficult for us when we're turning business away and we have people who cancel and don't tell us or just don't show up or wait until the night before and be like, oh yeah, I should have called you guys a couple weeks ago, but guess what, I'm not coming. And then we lose out economically. So we have people scheduled to work that we don't have work for. And we also have turned away other producers who really could have used that time slot. So, you know, I think each of these points has, like you said, a mutuality. The responsibility falls on both parties to work together to accomplish these things. But that is one of the things for a processor. If someone is sort of like a repeat offender about canceling without letting us know, then we are less inclined to want to put them on the schedule during our busy season.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's great additional information, Holly. And I think, you know, as she said, like, I think everybody gets it. It's not easy to book a year out. So as much advance warning as you can get to try and get to a place where maybe you can swap with another producer, swap a date with another producer. That's all just about investing the time in these relationships, right?
Yeah. If we had advance notice that, you know, say, okay, my herd isn't gaining weight at the rate that I wanted them to be, and they aren't going to be yielding the way that I had anticipated, it would really be helpful for me to have a couple more months. And then if we know that in advance, we can, like you said, call another producer and say, hey, would you mind trading out, or see if we could rearrange our schedule to do, you know, custom slaughter on a weekend to accommodate, you know, federally inspected client during the week, something like that.
Nice. Those are awesome, you know, examples of how Sunnyside is working really well with its ranchers. So, and, you know, an example that this is out there, this exists. I know some of you are probably saying, well, Matt, my processor would never do that. But, you know, I think Holly's here to say it's possible to get to that kind of, you know, mutual
And it took us a while. We weren't this company straight out the gate. We have been through other general managers historically that didn't approach things the same way that I do. And it took some learning, and we had to just really say, okay, you know, broaden the scope, have the conversations. How do we make this work? Because, you know, without the ranchers, we don't exist. So we have to be there to provide the services and the things that they need as well. So I'm glad we're just entering into this conversation with those dual points.
Cool. Okay, so back to our little bullet points here. This might be an obvious one, but I actually don't think it's obvious at all. Establishing communication protocols and styles. So some, as we know, and this goes for all of your vendors and all of your buyers as well. Not everybody works the same way. Do they want to be texted? Do they want an email? Do they want a phone call? When do they want the phone call? What is the cutoff? What are the deadlines for changes? What are the norms for, let's say, your direct clients coming and picking custom exempt product if they've paid you on the live weight and they're paying the processor on the hanging weight? That's something we're going to get into in a minute as well. But all this is to say is, again, this is part of those opening questions. How do you want me to communicate with you? Because it's not every processor is the same. Also asking up front about animal welfare practices. What does drop-off look like? What do the holding pens look like? What does loading look like? Again, this is not in a pressured moment where you're taking your first load and you're like, oh, I don't really like that. You know, I don't think this is going to work for me, but ahead of time. So you're thoroughly aware of what their norms are so that you know if there's any wiggle room, shoot design, kill method, all of that. Don't expect to show up and learn that on your first harvest day. Reviewing labeling and packaging options ahead of time. What is available, what is standard, and what is special, what is an extra fee, what don't they have the equipment to do, and why. How does pickup go? Where is pickup? Where is inventory stored? Do they have space? Do they have time for you to do that production check? What are terms for invoicing? And payments? Do they have extra cold storage? Do they have no cold storage? I mean, do you need to pick it up absolutely in the moment? I've seen all different answers to these, or versions of these scenarios, based on plant size, plant location, plant design, and the customer base that they serve. So it's not a given. And as I mentioned in the handout, there's a lot of deeper questions to ask. This is just touching on some of the big ones. So y'all in the group chat have anticipated the focus of this slide, which is that creative collaborations are 100% possible. They're not possible if you go into the relationship thinking that like the processor is not going to give you what you want. They are possible if there is that mutual respect, right? So there are opportunities for joint problem solving and that means you taking responsibility to help facilitate the changes you want to see in your processor. It's not always going to work. It's not always going to be possible. But it's about getting involved instead of expecting them to become whoever you want them to become, or not even inquiring why there are certain roadblocks, why there aren't certain pieces of technology or protocols or processes or workflows. So I have a list of examples here that I'm just going to like blow through, and then I want to see if Holly has any. These are all real things that I have either been involved in or tangentially, you know, been involved in through colleagues. So right there in Colorado, New Mexico, Sweetgrass Co-op actually paid for IT support for their processor to actually get the production reports out of the scale. The scale was already there. They didn't know how to use the scale. They didn't know how to get the reports out of it that the producers wanted. And so the producers paid for the IT guy to come and work with the processor to learn their own equipment. Happy Valley Meat is an aggregator that works primarily out of Eastern Pennsylvania and sells to the tri-state region in New England. They bought iPads for all of their processors to actually be tracking inventory on a more detailed way that actually worked for their physical space and that they could upload to the cloud. An organization that I worked with in California called Llano Seco, big, you know, large scale pork production. They're harvesting around 90 hogs a week. Actually paid for and facilitated for organic certification for their plant, the nearby plant, because it was 10 minutes away. So they wanted to be organic, and they helped facilitate that transition for the plant. They also bought a bacon roll stock machine for a different processor because that's what they wanted out of their bacon. And they went into a joint purchase that they paid for, you know, over time. They came up with terms, so they didn't have to pay for half of the price of the machine all at once.
But your roll stock machine, when we bought ours, was about $95,000. So.
Yeah, it's not small. And, you know, we talked about it for a long time in terms of like gearing up for the capital expense on the ranch side. You know, it was like planned out for many months in advance to make sure it made sense. And yeah, it was about really getting in bed. We were the first, I was really involved with this ranch, and we were really involved with this processor coming online. We were kind of like their guinea pigs. And so it made sense. It's like, okay, we're going to try you out. You're going to try us out. But that means we're going to kind of like get exactly what we are, because you guys don't exactly know what you are yet or what you want to be. So there's risk involved in that kind of relationship, and there's a lot of reward potentially in that kind of relationship. When I was living in Georgia, we actually bought Metro Racks. We like set up the inventory storage facility for our small custom exempt plant. And got them just labeling machines so that there could be labels in other parts of the storage facility, that we wanted that kind of ease of use upon pickup. And so we helped facilitate it. First Hand Foods, I don't know them. This came through my colleague, Nathan. Again, like this is a basic one, bought the Barcode inventory tracking software for the plant. And then Farm 255 was a restaurant, my restaurant, and we did a seam butchery exchange with one of our processors. So we actually brought in a butcher. To bring in a butcher to another butcher, to train another butcher is, you know, means that there was a lot of trust already in place between us and that processor. We weren't trying to tell him how to do his job. We were saying, hey, let's have like a fun day where we all cut meat together. And we brought our chef, our sous chef, and me, general manager, and seam butchery expert. And, you know, we're talking about a custom exempt plant in the middle of nowhere in rural Georgia. And he was open to it. He was like, sure. And, you know, he thought some of the stuff that the guy cut out of this carcass was hysterical. He's like, we would never do that. That takes us so long. Like, we would never do that. And then there was other stuff where, you know, seam butchery guy from New York City was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool, you know? So it was a beautiful exchange. And, you know, so these are, you know, there's also other examples out there of some of what we've seen here, which is cost share on equipment, infrastructure, facility build out. Sounds crazy, totally possible. Holly, I'm curious if you have heard of or seen or experienced yourself at Sunnyside any kind of these creative collaborations.
So we have one particular producer who brings us about 180 head of cattle per year. And they, at that time, we were using cardboard trays to put his meat in. And when you pick the trays up, they had a tendency to buckle, and he didn't like all the use of the cardboard. And so we got together and made a plan, and he researched and found some plastic trays that have hinged handles on them, and they were very durable but yet very expensive. So he found them, and he made a capital investment in the purchase for them so that we could rack his meat that way. Cool. So yeah, we've had that experience. And we have had chef visits before too. So when we want to make sure that what the restaurant is requesting of us is what they end up getting. Right. So it's good to have that education, because there are a lot of terms in meat processing, and sometimes some people call something one thing and another group of people call that cut something else. So if the client is asking for something very specific and we're not familiar with their terminology or what it is that they want out from us, providing that education is useful, is helpful.
Sweet. That's great. Yeah, bins are kind of an easy one. That I see that a lot, actually. I didn't put it in here, but just storage and stacking bins. I see you guys dropping your questions in the chat. They're not lost. We'll come back to them in just 1 second. There's just a couple more slides here that I want to get to. So also, while you're thinking about your questions for Holly, drop in there any creative collaborations you've been a part of or heard about, so that we can all learn from more examples of this, and any positive examples of producers and processors working together. I wish you guys could see this picture a little bit better. It looks a little small, but it's from Lawrence Meats in Minnesota, which is great. Maybe I'll send it around to you guys. Anyway, customer service, last little piece here. Another thing for y'all to drop in the chat that I'm curious about is just to know who's actually selling direct right now to consumers through live animal sales and custom exempt processing and direct processor pickup by that customer, right? So whether it's bulk meat, halves, quarters, eighths, sort of CSA style, but if you're doing it legally, as we reviewed in depth last week, you are selling the live animal and the customer is paying you for the animal in the slaughter and then the processor for the processing. I'm just curious how many of y'all are doing that. And I wanted to just visit a little bit of good practices for what that means between you and your processor and you as a triangulator between your customer and your processor, right? So they're technically paying the processor, they're picking up the meat, or usually they're picking up the meat. But now all of a sudden you've got a Joe Schmo and a processor, and it's hard enough for you to speak the same language as your processor. Imagine person who is buying a quarter cow for the first time to understand how to talk to the processor. So what I suggest that you do is treat this like an amazing opportunity for excellent customer service, just like the style of customer service you would give in any kind of high touch DTC, direct to consumer environment. So this means having excellent detailed information on your website about how your fees work and how the processor fees work. Providing a template of the cut sheet for the customer and working through it with them, not leaving that piece up to the processor and the customer to do. That's pretty standard, but I just want to reiterate it. Forewarning your processor when maybe your folks are going to call to schedule, like they are actually going to call and arrange for pickup. Being a bit of an intermediary there so that your processor knows when folks are coming down the line and vice versa. Following up with both parties about harvest and cutting time. So not just leaving that and then finding out later from your customer, your client, that, the processor was late or didn't call them back or whatnot. Be in the loop of all of those conversations all the way. And avoiding trial and error on this. Let's err on the side of being more present, more mediating of the exchange, and treating it like an opportunity to give some white glove service. It can also mean running block with the invoicing, sort of like, I don't want to make more work for the processor, but if you can help facilitate and avoid problems and the customer saying, where is my meat? Because I paid on hanging weight and that's not what I got back. That's a really common hurdle to get over in this scenario that you can avoid with good upfront communication and good interaction at the time of pickup, which means even being on site. You can also take that meat technically and help facilitate that delivery. There's a bit of a gray area there in terms of like legally they need to go pay the processor and actually retrieve their product. But I think there's ways to make that experience as easy as possible on the consumer side. Email communication efficiency, all efficiencies. So creating templates so you're not rewriting emails every single time to your consumer nor to your processor. Create some templates, create visual aids, and we've got this and a lot more suggestions for how to manage this exchange in our direct-to-consumer marketing webinar that we hosted a few months back. Again, all SWGLA resources and information is online and free for members. So video recordings, handouts, tools, and membership is free. So with that, I want to hand it over to Holly to tell us a little bit about what she sees and some best practices from her point of view. And then we're going to get directly into questions, both by raising your hand and the ones that are in the chat. I'll kind of go back up and revisit them. So Holly, any other thoughts that have come to mind as we've been talking today that you wanted to touch on?
Well, Olivia, so I was able to see some of the chats popping up and I could see like the first part of the sentence, but I couldn't see the end of it. And I feel like the best thing that we could do here is I would really like to address individual questions because I want to make sure that I'm speaking, people took their time to join the conference, and I want to make sure that they're getting their needs met on that. So do you think it would be appropriate if we just start taking some questions and
yeah, let's do it. That sounds
use
perfect.
the time? Okay, great.
So let me scroll back up to the first one. We've got, how do we handle it when the processor does not have a live weight scale?
Okay, so yeah.
Not a lot of workarounds there.
Yeah, you weigh your truck and your trailer at the truck stop, and then you go get your animal, and you put your trailer and the animal at the truck stop.
That's not a bad solution.
That's we're close to a state line where there is a truck weighing station. So we do have some customers who think that they have to weigh their own livestock because they don't know that we do it for them, but that's one workaround.
Another one is buying a scale for them and with them, which is what a few folks then started talking about in the chat, because there's a broken scale at somebody's processor and getting together with each other in the area to potentially actually like cost share to have it paid is an awesome solution. So,
and I think that the scale system, I would have to look into historically what the cost was to installers. You know, there's livestock scales that they can actually step on, but what I was explaining is that we do it when they're shackled before they're bled, so they're all still intact. And the scale is actually in the hoist.
Got it.
And so that might be economical way to go about it than an installed livestock scale.
Cool. All right, next question is, Kathy says, what Holly and Sunnyside are doing is really amazing. And what software are you all using? I love that you're doing hot carcass weight and weight post-aging.
Our software is VistaTrack. So it does, when the client makes their appointment, we enter their information into the software. And then, so when the livestock gets here, animal comes in, it gets stunned, it gets weighed. The VistaTrack, the first part where that animal enters into the system, other than being, you know, the producer's name and everything being entered, we digitally record the live weight, and then that's when the system generates a barcode for that particular animal, which then ends up on all of the packages related to that animal and all of the boxes like I was talking about. And so us having that technology serves two purposes. One is we're able to better give tracking information to our producers, and we also have a wholesale program. Were there ever to be a recall, we have very easy traceability. So it was kind of an expensive program to purchase, and it was a little bit difficult to learn how to use, but I would say, you know, look into that with your processor.
Cool. And that's also a pretty common software solution for, let's call them medium-sized operations, for tracking your own meat inventory back at the ranch. So what I usually suggest is, if you're getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 150 SKUs of your own product, start thinking about that software tracking investment, because inventory gets very unruly for yourself on ranch if you're looking at, you know, managing 100+ products, different products. And VistaTrack is one of those solutions as well. Which we're going to talk about inventory management very briefly in just a minute. Okay, next question. Is it appropriate to ask the processor the contact information of other producers to start a campaign for a capital purchase? Great question.
So I would say for the processor, it is a little bit, that line would be a little bit blurry. What you might say is to the processor, I would like to coordinate with other producers that you're serving. Would you maybe put feelers out for me and see if anybody else would like to share their information with me so that I can help collaborate this? Because I feel, yeah, there's, especially if there's any sort of competition between two producers, and one producer would view that as us giving another producer any sort of inside information about them. So we would prefer not, at Sunnyside, we would prefer not to give out each other's information, but we could ask other producers, if you want to contact this person, here's what they're trying to do. And we would be happy to do that for someone.
Great. That's great. And also, you know, sending out the vibe yourself through the producers you do know, so that the producers that they know, you know, just put out your own feelers through your general network. Anyway, and I have a lot to say about knowing your competition, but that's a different webinar. All right, so next question. Is it standard for a processor to put weights on my individual cuts on my labels? I'm currently paying $20 per lamb to have my custom labels to be used. So those are two questions right there, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
conflated into one. We've got weights and then we've got a custom label.
I think that the answer to that question probably varies broadly. I have visited other packing houses in our state that still use a red ink stamp and it just says loin chop. So no, that package is not going to have a weight or anything. And that this is a custom state inspected, not a USDA inspected facility that I'm talking about specifically there. But I would think that the trend in meat processing would be going towards having a labeling system that would put the weights on the packages. But our capability for doing that really came when we, well, I guess we were able to do it before VistaTrack, but that VistaTrack really helped us with that. So I would say I guess I hope I'm answering this question at all. I would hope that it's common that weights are appearing on packages. And as far as the fee for using the private label, that's not a fee that we charge. The producer has to purchase their own labels, but we don't charge more to use those labels.
And I've seen a lot of variation there as well, Holly, across the board.
Sure.
I think it gets back to approaching the conversation as a question. So I would love to have weights on my cuts. Is there anyone else asking for that? What's the reason, like, what is your scenario? What is your setup that prohibits you from putting weights on my, like, asking questions rather than kind of making demands, I think is the route towards hopefully troubleshooting that in the future. And it might come down to, again, like offering to help that purchase.
Yeah, a labeling system that's capable of that if that's a capital expenditure that the processor hasn't been able to
support yet.
Support.
Okay, that's all we've got right now. Kathy's got a comment about a new resource, which we're actually going to show at the end of this presentation. Quick slide. So hold tight on that comment, Kathy. And any other questions? Well, we have Holly. Well, she's going to stay here with us, but
yeah, I'm here.
This is our moment to ask her deeper questions. And feel free to raise your hand and use your voice and your.
And one thing, I don't know if this needs to be stated, but one thing that Olivia and I spoke about when she first asked if I would be willing to join in the conversation today is that I think one of the reasons that she chose me specifically for this conversation is because of the length of time I've been doing this industry, and also that you're not going to ruffle my feathers. If you ask me, I mean, really, if there's something that you want to ask or a grievance that you want to discuss, this is a safe and open place to do that. So please feel free. I'd love to be of assistance here.
Thank you, Holly, for that. We've got one more that came in. What is the process that processors go through when creating a new label and a new recipe for a product? Is it too much to ask a processor to do?
So every time we create a new recipe, we have to write a HACCP plan, which some processing facilities really struggle with, either not having a lot of educational background about writing those types of plans or not having adequate staff. We at Sunnyside have quite a bit of office staff, more than most processors our size. So we have one staff member whose title is Food Safety Coordinator, who most of the work that he does here is related to writing HACCP plans, creating new labels, doing that kind of work. So for us, it's something that we can provide. But I think for a lot of small processors, it could be a request that just seems overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So because they don't have the labor force to do it, it would be taking someone's time from actually processing meat to devoting the time to doing this thing that can be daunting and confusing.
Mhm.
So it certainly doesn't hurt to ask, but that would be maybe another place where if the the producer could lend any support in the process of writing a HACCP plan or learning about, so like specifically private labels with special claims,
Mhm.
those have to go through Washington, D.C., and it's a pretty rigorous process. And so you have to have affidavits that support your claims and paperwork, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's not simple. And also on the label itself, there's so many inches that have to be devoted to information that the USDA requires for us to print on there, like safe handling instructions, our USDA bug. So there's only so much space that can be devoted to language about special claims and logos. And so I'm speaking from experience. We had a client who pretty consistently wanted to change the label and change the claims and change what we were producing for them, with very little understanding about the back end of that for us. And that created quite a bit of conflict. So, I would say do a little bit of research about if it's a USDA inspected product and you're making special claims, do some research about what that entails and be prepared to participate in that process. And also that process can be lengthy. So be prepared.
Yeah, and that's actually our next slide.
Excuse me.
So no, that's great. It's awesome. This more information, the better. I think, but to get to the recipe side of things, I think the key takeaway here is that each processor has to do a new HACCP plan for every new recipe. And that's a really important sort of piece of information. Just again, getting back to understanding what the processors,
yeah, and so and the recipe building is, we have to do allergen statements. So we have to, each ingredient, we have to have a letter of guarantee from the vendor that sells us that ingredient that it is wholesome and pure as it is labeled. And that, so if for instance, this happened to us, we were using a red chili flake that was processed at a place in California that also processed tree nuts, but on the red chili flake label, it didn't say that. And so we didn't have that red chili flake listed as a potential allergen on our label. The company later notified us of this, so we faced a potential recall on that product because we hadn't labeled it correctly. So if you have complicated ingredients or even simple ingredients, there's, be aware that there are steps that we have to do to guarantee the wholesomeness of those ingredients each time we change a recipe.
Super insightful. Sounds like a mess.
Hey, everybody likes to cook, right?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Holly. Yeah, super insightful. Okay, I think we're gonna keep going here. If y'all do have other questions, please do feel free to keep dropping them in the chat, and hopefully we'll get to them at the very end if we have extra time. And one of those prompts is also, I want to hear some examples of, positive relationships, positive experiences, just so we can move away from the dark and towards the light and the hopefulness. So quick moment on labeling and certifications. We've dabbled in doing a whole labeling and certifications webinar, which we could definitely fill up multiple hours with, but I just wanted to address it because this is a supply chain primer. We can't talk about supply chain without talking about labels. So another thought to drop into the chat, if you're feeling up to it, is, do you market the cattle you raise, or do you raise your cattle for a market? And this gets down directly to why you may or may not choose to have a third-party label and be a part of a third-party certification. So essentially, third-party claims third-party certifications are a marketing and sales tactic. They're not just an animal husbandry approach. They are both things equally. So that gets to my question, right? We really want you to consider your market first and foremost before you decide what label you're going to go after, what other certification you go after. Is this what your customers want? And if they do want it, then you know you're going to be making the right move in investing in that certification. You've got to choose what resonates for you and your context as well. So both sides, you and your consumer, knowing that there's market to meet what you want to certify your product as. It's a brand differentiation tactic for sure, but it's still got to go through the USDA. Some claims have standard review practices, such as the ones that are going through certifications through third parties, and some do not. So just quick look at some logos that we are familiar with. I actually had one editor of this presentation look at the cool down at the bottom and say, yeah, you know, with the election coming up, it might be a little bit touchy to put the, you know, cool America stamp down there. That's not a judgment. That's actually stands for country of origin labeling. So there's nothing subjective about that down there. It's just a placeholder for one of the avenues that you can go towards in your third-party certifications. And some of these we're familiar with, some of them maybe a little bit less familiar to folks. So a quick how-to. We really want to be doing this months and months before your slaughter date for those animals. Approvals and review times vary greatly. So your packing plant, your processor will have, you know, them on file if you've been awarded certifications and approvals. And you can't make changes to that once the meat leaves the plant. So can you have your logo on packages? Gets to that last question that we have. Can you have whatever you want in the packages like your logo? It really depends on the equipment and the operations of the plant. Talk to your processor with respect to find out what is possible. And then we get to the special claims. Usually they're around animal husbandry practices, but I've worked with a number of ranches that, you know, yeah, just like Holly said, want to change their claims all the time, want to change how they're marketing their product all the time. Whether it's with a certification or just the words on the label. So certifications have a more standard process through a third-party certifier. Special claims, you can say certain things on your label, but the USDA has to approve it. So here are some examples: grass-fed, humanely raised, free range, no hormones, pasture raised, pretty much anything you'd want to put on your label to communicate the value and the value add of your product, knowing who's in this audience, you've got to get approval for those. That includes a submittal packet that's got an affidavit and segregation protocol and an image of the label and a cut list that's going into it and an ingredient list. And we're talking about 8 to 10 weeks. You know, don't let the USDA tell you it's going to be 2 weeks. They'd love to tell you that. But it's really looking like more to 8 to 10 weeks. I've seen 3 or 4 months. I'm sure Holly has as well. I've seen 2 weeks. The problem is that because they are special claims that do not have a predetermined standard by the USDA, it means that they are subject to individual reviewers. So what that means is that you get one reviewer one time who asks you certain questions, and then the next time you go through the process, you could get a different reviewer asking you completely different questions for the same exact words. So that's part of the inconsistency and part of the headache. It's just the way it is. So here's some resources. Again, you've got the presentation in your email or downloadable on the conference site. These are live links. USDA FSIS Labeling Basics. It's a beast of a document. You've got to know it backwards and forwards. It gets down to the size, type, face of certain claims and how they are appearing in relationship to the name of the product. Things like this that you never thought that you needed to know. Sure, you can have somebody on your staff that knows this stuff if you're a little bit larger than a one-person operation, but again, you're in the meat business. This is the kind of details that you need to know. NC Choices has some good step-by-step instructions for filling out special claims applications. And then the kind of easier route to go, which does not take away the headache entirely, is by working with an expediter or a consultant. Yes, they cost money. They're not out of control in terms of their fees. They help move things through the USDA more swiftly, and they troubleshoot your label and your application with you before it goes to the USDA. So you fix all the stuff before you're waiting for the reviewer to get back to you. I know that's brief. Hold your questions. We're just going to kind of plow through here. Just wanted to give you guys an idea of labeling. Like I said, we could get really deep into it, but not today. Inventory management. So next step, right? Throw in the chat who is currently keeping track of your inventory. I'm just curious, who's actually counting? Are you counting at all? Are you recording things on a piece of paper? Do you have a sticky note on top of the cooler? Do you have an Excel spreadsheet? Do you have a software program? I'm curious where everyone is at in here. So go ahead and drop that in if you all don't mind. So two pieces here, you know, there's the actual record keeping and there's the physical inventory, physical count, and every motion counts. So every move, every time the product moves matters, because it means that there's an opportunity for things to get lost or confused. And so every motion should be recorded. We've got solutions like a clipboard for in and out of coolers and freezers, right? Just like you take something out, you check off that what you took out. Some best practices here, using oldest inventory first, right? First in is first out. That's a general rule. We don't want to find stuff in the bottom of your freezers that has been there for 3 years that you didn't know. Again, this gets to the sort of due diligence about touching your inventory and knowing what's in there. Touching it a lot is going to give you a higher chance of nicking those cryo packs, right? So we're moving inventory with gloves on slowly and carefully, and training people that are in market scenarios like farmers markets to have, they have to have a system as well. And they have to know that they can be contributing to the denigration of product and eventual oxidation if they're throwing stuff in and out of freezers back and forth the whole time that they're selling meat. So this gets really into ops, you know, this is about systems ops. And so being careful about how that actually happens at some of your markets is an important piece of inventory management. You've got to be taking individual weights. A lot of this can be solved inside of certain software platforms, but not everything, right? But you need to know what those individual weights are as well, and then transfer that up into your accounting software. We're going to talk about accounting software in just a minute.
Olivia, can I just say something about freezing food real quick?
Yeah.
So everything that leaves Sunnyside leaves here in frozen state, except for very rarely someone, well, I shouldn't say very rarely. More and more often we're having restaurants who have their own in-house butchers take out primals or halves or carcasses or things like that. But pretty much what we package for our clients for their resale programs leaves here frozen. But I just, if I wanted to make a point here about freezing food, if someone is picking up meat that's in boxes that isn't frozen and they put it in a freezer without airflow around the boxes, like this, I'm speaking from experience. We did this ourselves one time. We stacked a whole bunch of boxes in the corner of a freezer, and the meat in the middle of the cube never froze. Not ever. Like months later, it was putrefying in the freezer because it didn't freeze.
Wow.
It's about spacing and airflow in your freezer storage.
That's a nightmare story. I love it. So valuable.
Way to learn that lesson the hard way. I mean, you'd think like, how can something be in a freezer for months and never freeze? But if the air doesn't get to it, it won't freeze.
It won't freeze. Yep. Awesome.
So yeah, have circulation around your boxes or your products or however you, like on the shelves, however you organize that.
Cool. And it looks like everybody in the chat's pretty much in Google spreadsheet, almost everybody, which is awesome. That makes my heart warm because lots of people weren't using even spreadsheets. So those are great first steps. So small scale operations, inventory storage, you've got to know your local and state regulations. You've got to know what your regulations are for transport and for storage. You know your health inspector, know the jurisdiction of your space. Are you under ag and markets or are you under environmental health? Who is giving you the license and permit to actually store meat, and get to know that person. Obviously we know, I think that, but maybe we've got some emerging producers just in case, that we need coolers with thermometers in them. Dry ice is a good solution for moving through product in a market situation, so as to not be worried about it slacking out. And then we get to some larger scale operations, just some basic things that you're thinking about as you might scale. So again, as you're getting upwards of those 75, 100 SKUs, you're going to be thinking about different systems completely, because you've got too much meat and too many product types to be managing with clipboards and a simple spreadsheet. So you can split your different SKUs into individual Excel pages, tracking motions for each one, or a master inventory sheet that tracks in and out of each cut and split across multiple locations. Locations are different. You need to be tracking in different locations. This takes diligence and upkeep. There is no way around inventory management. It is shitty. It's just shitty. That's it. It really ideally is kind of one person, a dedicated individual. That really helps sort of cut down on errors. Pros and cons of barcode tracking and scanning. Great, it's expensive. We know it's expensive, but you might be at the scale where that expense really makes sense. So scales connected to scanners, connected to software system, around 100 SKUs, start thinking about it. And know if that's where you want to get, if you're going to be getting into a lot of product variation, which includes weight classes, right? So 3 different weight classes for a single cut. You might need to be making that larger investment. Lot code system for tracking. This is super important in terms of being able to rotate inventory and being able to find your meat in the event of a recall. Warehousing offsite, cold storage. Most medium scale operations do need to do this. It's a battle between the release of control versus the ease of management. So you've got people working there. They all work slightly differently. You may be able to sort on site yourself. You may be paying the cold storage staff to sort and pull and order pick off of your pallets or from your cases. So that just depends on what you've got close by. But the benefit is obviously they've got that really expensive inventory tracking system for the most part. And it just depends on how you're sorting your meat when it goes in there in conjunction with what their systems are. Don't forget to estimate the cost of holding your inventory if you're in this scale. And we're spreading it across all of your product in order to come up with a price that is including this in your margin. This is part of cost of goods sold. And that's something that we're going to get into very briefly in a minute. But this is a piece of calculating your cost of production before you set a price on that cut. So I know I'm going pretty fast here. We are running a little bit up behind, but I do want you guys to have some good time with each other. So I'm kind of breezing, and I'm going to get to a moment of Q&A before we break out. So production planning, this is really about, value-added products as well. When you're small, it's a little easier to handle your production planning, and you're working with frozen product, and most of your considerations about retaining that frozen product's integrity. And how are you going about refreezing anything that's value-added that you've gotten processed? And considerations for creating shelf-ready product, like do you have the market for it? Going out and creating that market for it before you just start creating a bunch of value-added products just because you heard that value-added products are a good idea is the right way to go about it. And then thinking through if you're calculating cost right, like, are you really thinking through that value added processing and what it's going to take to produce that sausage before you stick a price on it and know that your market can handle it and absorb it and wants your product. So then if you're a little bit on the medium or large scale side, you're really planning months and months out, and you've got to work backwards, right? You're working with co-packers, and you're working with multiple storage facilities, and you're working backwards from the release point of a retail product. So let's say you want something on the shelf, or, you know, as part of your portfolio in 6 months, you've got to work backwards and work through, you know, slacking out product to even get it to the producer on site, to the processor on site that's going to be co-packing for you. You're balancing production timing, transit schedules, capacity, raw material considerations, transport in both directions for all of the pieces, and then the shelf life once it's made. So you really need to think through each step before the raw product becomes a finished product. A little bit about inventory inside of accounting. We're not going to get into the accounting. I wanted to touch on a few basics right now. As a meat business, you've got to declare inventory for taxes. As a livestock business, you're not required to hold inventory on your balance sheet. But if you're selling meat, you are a meat business. So this is not something that you have to do every day. You don't have to be entering inventory into your accounting software every day. It needs to be done correctly for your taxes. Lots of small operations do it at the end of the year. You need to have an accomplished bookkeeper and accountant be helping you with how you're keeping your inventory inside of your accounting software. Usually, most commonly, what we like to recommend is a monthly transfer of inventory counts at their value into your QuickBooks or your accounting software. It's an asset. It has a dollar value, and so it lives on your balance sheet. This means that eventually, the accounting transaction moves money off of your bottom line in an income, or moves money off of your expenses in your income statement to your balance sheet. So again, this is something that if you're not super savvy in accounting, we want to be doing with an accountant. But the cuts in your inventory are not valued at their market price. They're valued at everything it costs to make them divided by the number of pounds that you get back out of each animal. So we've got our carcass, right? Everything it costs to produce the animal, the processing fees, the storage, the labeling, everything that goes into that individual cut divided by the number of pounds of actual sellable meat you get back. Not the hanging weight, because that's not all sellable meat. And so essentially your standing inventory, knowing what your standing inventory is at any given time, is allowing you to compare what sales have gone out the door and the revenue that has come in to what you got processed and what you actually still have on hand, to make sure you can double check for any holes in the system in terms of unknown loss or waste. So in accounting, an ideal scenario is that your ranch business is operating in one entity and your meat business is operating in another. Not necessarily two separate legal entities. There are other reasons to do that, or tax reasons, estate planning reasons, but at least two different areas in your accounting. Not every ranch and farm does this. Small ones actually don't do this, and that's okay. But I'm just painting the ideal picture. You've got your meat business tracking your products in your inventory, and you've got your ranch activities producing animals. Again, this is an area for a CPA, but I just wanted to lay out to you how inventory can interface with accounting. We cover a lot of this stuff in our business structures and accounting basics for livestock businesses webinar. I encourage you guys to delve in deep there. So let's see, I want to stop for questions really quickly before I get into sales and pricing, and make sure I address anything that is, pressing. So we've got a question about an alternative or future alternative to plastic and cryo, anything hemp or plant-based. Holly, have you seen anything?
You know, that is the first time I've had that brought up. So that would be something really interesting to look into.
Yeah, I haven't yet. Lots of good recycled and upcycled packaging materials for shipping meat. And actually MPAN has a super cool website, a webinar about that with some guests that if y'all are interested in, get in touch with me and I'll send you the link. But I haven't heard anything for freezer, like freezer safe cryo, freezer safe plastic that works differently. So I would love to find out.
Yeah.
All right, that's my only question in chat. So I think I'm gonna keep going. Hope y'all are keeping up with me. All right, so really briefly wanted to touch on sales strategy. Again, as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a webinar for this too, but it felt very incomplete to get to this point in the whole supply chain at, you know, the end of our 2 sessions and not just talk about, just mention what happens at the point of sale. So knowing your cost of production is probably the most important thing for me in terms of you making successful sales. It's a necessary requirement for your pricing. You should not be selling anything without due diligence and knowing your production costs. So I don't like to jump ahead to sales strategy or marketing strategy until I impress upon you the importance of knowing that cost of production. So that's pre-processing, you know, animal on the field, and post-harvest processing. Rapid fire overview of how that works. Variable costs and fixed costs. We've got variable costs that go up and down with the number of head you raise, like feed and feeders and processing and minerals and supplements. The more animals that you have, the more more money you spend on those expenses. And then we've got fixed costs that generally don't change as you scale or shrink your herd. They're your overhead, they're your marketing, your administration, your rent, your salaries usually. They don't go into your per head cost of production. And we really want your cost of production per unit to be positive. Your overall business may be in the red, but your per unit cost must always be in the black to survive, right? Your margin must always be in the black to survive. And then we're adding in our post-production costs per pound and calculating a total cost of goods sold, or COGS, on your sellable meat, and setting a responsible price based on market realities in balance with cost realities. So what does that mean? Cost-based pricing versus market-based pricing is 2 different philosophies. You got to know your cost of production, add some stuff on the top, and then you're going to be making a margin. But that might not be what the market can bear. And so we combine those 2 philosophies in order to set our pricing. You can't just work off of cost of production, and you can't just work off what the market can bear, because you won't necessarily always cover your costs. You're just going on what the market wants, right? So cost of production webinars linked here. We've got a super cool cost of production tool. And then we've got our super cool yield and margin tool to play around with pricing based on what you've got all in to each one of those pounds of sellable meat, right? And we're looking in that tool again as an overall animal or group average profit dollar or percentage. And we're looking at it on a per cut basis inside of that tool, with or with accounting for distributors. And then we're going to look at that across multiple channels to know how our margin changes as we change our prices for different sales channels. And remember that profit is not the only factor into choosing our market channels. So that's great. We know we're going to make money in a direct-to-consumer environment, but can we manage it, right? And lower and higher margin channels each have their benefits. So think of it like insurance. So one channel might fail, as we've seen happen in a global pandemic, that some of our channels start to underperform and take different offerings. And in a mixed channel approach, you've got another channel or multiple channels to balance, to use your inventory, expand your reach. So highest margin sales channel isn't always king. It can give you a high margin, but produce lower volume of sales or take too much effort to manage. How are you going to market? Who's going to actually do the selling? Who's going to be hustling? Who's going to manage the customers? What kind of time and energy does it take, and resources? And factor that into your thinking about whether that that margin, high margin channel is really the right one for you, or at what level, right? How much energy is going to go into that market channel? You don't have to be huge to use this mixed channel approach mentality. We're looking for balance. And even, yes, in COVID, there are benefits to that balance. So more on this. Communications and strategy, marketing planning, foundational brand thinking. What's the research that goes into even deciding where you're going to sell and what you're going to sell and what that label is going to say? Sales strategy, diving into these 3 slides really deeply for an hour and a half with myself and Anjali. And then marketing practices, direct to consumer. And then next month, preview, selling wholesale in COVID times. So we were going to focus on, basic how-tos for selling wholesale. And we decided I decided that it would be much more interesting to really dive into how do I sell wholesale when wholesale markets have dropped out because of COVID. So we've got a 6-person panel from across the buying sphere. And that's coming up on December 8th. So I'd love to see y'all there. All right. We made it to the breakout groups. So again, this is supposed to be at least a little bit of relief and getting to know you and taking the place of being in a conference together. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to break you out automatically into groups of 4. Tell each other who you are, where you are, what you sell, what you raise, and identify a spokesperson, because we are going to come back for the last 5 minutes maybe now. And just share a little bit about what you talk about. And so we're going to take 15 minutes in our breakout groups. And so that means, roughly 3 minutes each person. And here's what we're going to talk about. Anything you want, anything about today, but here's some topics. So of all the stages of the supply chain we talked about, what's one thing that you learned you didn't already know? What's one thing you're inspired to do differently with your processor as a result of this session? Do you or how do you calculate cost of production, and how do you track yields? What's an area that you're confused about and need more information on? And so this was one that I thought could be kind of interesting. Share an anecdote of hardship or a decision that you made, by yourself, probably in a flurry, about any aspect of your supply chain. And would you change your decision now knowing some of the things you do today? Would you do something differently? And ask each other for some advice or guidance about how that situation could have been handled differently. So Holly and I are going to be thrown into a room with you guys. We'll listen or participate, but we don't want to take your space. Again, this is space for y'all to get to know each other. And then we'll come back at 5 of and share around whoever feels like sharing what your groups talked about. And Tyler, you can break us out into groups and away we go. Okay, cool. Hopefully that was wonderful and you met some interesting people and you talked about some interesting things, hard things and happy things. And mostly I just hope you got to know each other a little bit. And so we are nearing the end here. I want to go back to sharing my screen real quick for just a couple of other quick reminders about follow-up and resources. So membership to SWGLA, I've said it a million times. Also free technical assistance. I believe I mentioned this last time. We do have that available to folks. And so it's a quick application. It's going to be moving into 2021 as well. So for some of these tools or specific issues, go ahead and fill out an application. Wholesale sales in the time of Corona, December 8th. And some awesome panelists, 2 chefs, a branded program that aggregates from multiple ranchers, a butcher shop, someone else that I'm forgetting, should be really fun. And so then we've got a presentation and resources handout in the conference center that will be where the video will be able to be downloaded. Usually I've seen that Kuvira is uploading it like a couple days later. So look for that in a couple days. Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. They've got lovely resources, incredible listserv, totally relevant to producers, not just processors. Webinars, a great archive, and a new offering, Western Meat School, an in-depth training that started a couple weeks ago that has been kicking off and that they're hoping to continue to do as well. So last little thing that we had a comment about earlier is I'm just plugging a project of some friends and colleagues called the Good Meat Breakdown. So their mission is to save producers time and help them educate customers about how to find farmers stewarding land with care, how to buy good meat, and how to cook it in ways that nourish families and communities. So it's both a consumer-facing and a producer-facing resource. And as part of the producer tools, they've made these beautifully designed toolkits that are super succinct for producers to incorporate into your own marketing and outreach strategies. And they're previewing this tomorrow. I think it's at 1, I'm not positive, but it is Friday for sure. And the site is live sometime this morning. So go ahead and check that out. And that's it. You did it. 4 hours with me. Thank you so much for your patience. And yeah, any last thoughts from anybody that they want to throw in the chat? Or I'm going to go ahead. You've got our email addresses here, and also mine is in the CC line of all of your reminders from Kuvira. And thank you so much to Holly for being the superstar processor and answering all of our questions. And please reach out. And thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was in a breakout session with Kathy from Tomcat, and we were talking about well, it was like really great to learn about the thing with the airflow, because we didn't know that, you know, that you have to squeeze those boxes out in the freezer like that. And I've had somebody tell me something like that before, but I didn't realize it was because the meat would actually not freeze in a freezer. But the other thing we were talking about is, do you know, for like people that have popped cryo packages, is there a way they can still, like, can you still sell a popped cryo package, like, legally?
Like, legally?
Yeah.
Oh, you can sell whatever you want.
I mean, you know, stores will remove packages from their shelves when they're not intact any longer.
Okay.
So.
Well, let's ask
I'm not sure
where
if that's
are you selling into, Mary?
So it would be direct to consumer. So
okay.
like I could advertise it as like a popped cryo package, and like give like I would give a 50% discount on that.
Absolutely. And that's what I always
retailers do that with short dated product, perishable product,
Wow.
you know, dented cans, that kind of thing. I think that when the meat is in frozen state, the pathogenic risks of having a compromised package are so much reduced that it's a little bit different than if, you know, if there's a pack of hot dogs on the shelf at the grocery store and that cryo seal becomes compromised, they will remove that product from the shelf because it's not in frozen state. The thing that's going to happen in frozen state is you're going to get freezer burn and oxidation. So, yeah. I mean, if it's a pork product, it can actually go rancid while frozen. That's that's a result of oxidation. So it'll have that rancidity to it.
Takes a while.
It takes a while. It does. So I would say if you're rotating your inventory pretty well, I don't know that there is a law against that.
Okay.
You take the risk, Mary. I mean, right? It's your own risk. There's no legal, you know, situation around it. You take the risk of somebody coming back and saying like, oh, well, it was brown and then it got food poisoning. It's like,
oh yeah,
you know, whatever. So you have to know that there is some risk if a consumer is perceiving something that's like not as high of quality.
Yeah.
But what I encourage people to do is find wholesale avenues for some of that meat. There are wholesale, like it's usually restaurant or caterer avenues where you can load a lot of product at a lower margin, but that they'll take a higher amount of it, and they can figure that out because they're usually transforming it. You know, you're not going to sell like a fillet like that they're just slicing and searing. Obviously, they're not going to take it. But first in, first out is really important for that reason. And then also training your staff about that, what happens in that actual rotation, because most of the nicks that I see happens in post pickup handling, not in the processor. Obviously they don't have it for that long. So moving that inventory around 1 million times and looking for in the freezers for the right weight, size, or something like that happens. But finding an avenue to sell it and sell it off at a discounted rate is, I think, a great way of educating people about exactly what we're talking about, that there is very minimal food safety risk, that the product has not been frozen and unfrozen. Right. It has just been exposed to air. And so it has changed color, and the molecular change has started inside of the meat tissues, but it's not something that's going to make somebody sick.
That's good to know. I have like over 20 popped cryo turkeys.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would grind that and make sausage, but
that sounds great.
Sausage.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary, for being here. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I wish I was there.
Me too. And Holly, like the way you're doing, so you have your abattoir and processor, like it's all in one place. You do the slaughter and the packing, everything like in one facility. Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, and then the retailing we have like the butcher shop. We take swinging carcasses out of here and cut and sell fresh meat there, which is totally offsite, totally different. But here, yes, everything is all contained in one building.
Oh, that's so cool. So we have like abattoirs that are totally separate from the processor for most of our animals. We have
what state are you
in California.
Oh, okay.
So for our sheep, we go up to Superior and Dixon, and they do the kill and the packaging on like in one spot. And then for our turkeys, we go to Creston, and they do the kill and the packaging in one spot. But like for our pork, the closest, like we have to take our pigs to Fresno, and then they get transported to Paso Robles for processing, which is like, I mean, nothing's super close. And the same with the beef, we have to take it to the abattoir, and then we have to take it to we pay the processor to pick up the meat, or the abattoir to deliver, like, or vice versa. It depends on, we have different relationships with different, processors. But.
Mary, where are you slaughtering?
So for which, like
for cattle, sorry.
For cattle, so we process at Western Meat in Turlock, and and then we have it processed at Sanders Meat in there in Turlock, also in the valley.
Okay.
Yeah. So the cattle's not super far. It's not as far as some of the other animals have to go, but it's still, where it's two different places.
Right. And they're custom exempt as well.
Yeah. And they're really, I love the ladies at for the cattle and for the pigs that I work with, helping even like with the cut sheets, or if they have suggestions, they're just like, they're really great to work with. They're family businesses.
Superior that gives you a problem.
Superior is you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, but their packaging is amazing. That packaging probably lasts like beyond our lifetime. So
I still have lamb neck from y'all in the freezer, by the way. That's proof.
Well, and if it's in Superior packaging, it's probably like as fresh as day one. Yeah. So it's really their packaging is superior. So. But, and everybody else, it's okay. I wish everybody had packaging like that, but there's something to be said for like the flexibility and customer service that all the other processors offer. It's really nice, and I'm really happy to hear about the popped cryo thing. Like, we have enough employees at the Piscinus Ranch where, like, when somebody places an order, like, we all get popped cryo, and that's what I eat mostly. Like, I hardly ever eat something that's not popped. But to know that I can sell it, I mean, I can just make a page on our website that's like, popped cryo, and then I can explain to people exactly what that means. And
that sounds good.
Yeah, but no, it's good. And one thing that Kathy and I were talking about too was just the nightmare of inventory management. Like, that is probably our biggest challenge of the whole process.
Yeah. It's
our freezer right now is like, we've had all our harvests like in a short amount of time. So I have all my product for like the whole year that comes in 3 months. And so I have some stuff that stuff stacked to the ceiling in some places in the freezer.
Yeah. Well, Mary, if you want to talk more about that in terms of like even technical assistance, let me know. And we're actually doing it for Corner Post Meats in Colorado right now through SWGLA. And I think I have a little budget wiggle room left this year. So get in touch.
Okay, I will.
Since there could be some efficiencies there, since we're doing it right now for another producer that's a SWGLA member. So.
Yeah, I need to get signed up for that.
All right. Well, I have to dash, folks, but I really appreciate the conversation. And thanks to Michael and Doug for hanging on and listening. Nice to have you guys here too. And